this is a big topic, a heavy topic, a dense topic. So we're going to have some presentations, which is a little different, as you know if you've been to Council Talks before. That's not normally how we do things, but we are making an exception this time. Once again, the objective of Town Talks is to bring the community together to talk about important topics to our community face-to-face as opposed to online or over social media, what have you. So thank you so much for coming. Before we get started, I'm going to hand it over to Deborah, who's just going to give you a little glimpse of what we have going on at the library this month.
Hi, thank you all for coming and welcome. I am Deborah, and I'm a person who helps coordinate the programs at the library, and we have a lot that's going on. We recognize that one area that we really needed to do better is to reach out to our senior community. And one way we did that is by asking Jackie Smith, who's a senior advocate, senior OACC commissioner, and para-legislative team, to bring her senior summits to the library. The first one is this Friday. It's Scams, Money, and You, and she's got special guests, the Honorable Fiona Ma, California State Treasurer, and Jamie Horning, the OACC Commissioner, and Seniors First from Senior 411 Org, and also representatives from the local law enforcement to talk about the types of scams that are targeting seniors in this community. So that's this Friday, 10:30 to 12:30. And Facebook is not letting us boost it the way we normally do our things because I guess the word senior is too political. So if you could all help us, we'd really like this to be well attended. She's doing a second one.
Have a few of those.
Of course, and they're up here, and I'll have more.
Okay, yes.
Her second one, and the numbers are all out of sequence. We were not able to get her in September for the first one. So we're starting with Senior Summit 2, and then we will be going to Senior Summit 1, which is living your best, it's going to be Senior Summit 3, Healthcare and You. So in November, she'll be talking about drug prices, insurance, the master plan on aging and you. And then in December, she'll be talking about living your best life, what's happening in California for seniors. And again, she's planning to bring a great panel of guest speakers with her.
Is it always the first Friday then?
It will be the first Friday of those months, yes. It'll from 10:30 to 12:30. And I'll have flyers for all of them back here. Also, we're on our third of 4 NASA Ambassador Solar System Information Series with NASA Solar System Ambassador Tim Pinckney. He did the Apollo 11 anniversary talk. He came back in September, and he was able to talk about Mars and why that is important to some of our plans for moving forward with NASA. And so the next one will be on the 15th, and it's going to be a Tuesday from 3 to 5, and it's going to be about Jupiter, our solar system's 900-pound gorilla. So we hope that you can join us for those. And we also have other exciting things going on at the library. We're also trying to reach out to our teens and tweens. And so we're going to reintroduce game time on the Friday, the Saturday, yeah. It's which Saturday of the month is that?
I believe the third.
I think it's the third Saturday of every month we'll have game time. That was really popular this summer. And then also on the 5th of October, the same day that we will be at the Oktoberfest or the Eggplant Festival. The UC Master Gardeners, they partner with us to help bring awareness to our seed library. They will be having their meeting here, Hit or Myth, Gardening Myths. It's interactive. It should be a lot of fun. So you can come here at 10:30 in the morning on Saturday the 5th, and when you're done, head on over to the Eggplant Festival and find our booth, where if you know people who do not yet have a Loomis Library card, they will get a Loomis Library bag. Nice. So that's one of our little incentives to help people get signed up for class. September was our library card sign up month. It's October. We're not going to stop pushing to get more and more people to become members of the library. It is free. We have a 2 for free special. So if you know someone, bring a friend, and they can also get a free library card. so I will have flyers available, and then, again, we will be closed except for the morning with the Lucy Master Gardeners on the 5th. So thank you. And now we have some very important, Mrs. Bonnie, who's going to introduce our guests. Okay, here we are.
I will reiterate, thank you all for being here. If you don't know me, I'm Mary Beth Van Boris. I'm the Town of Loomis Planning Director, almost a year. So I'm happy to be here. I am here to introduce your first guest speaker. And it's kind of long, but important. So bear with me as I can go off script, but I need my bullets. Our guest speaker tonight is an accredited professional in land use and environmental planning who has managed large, complex, and controversial programs that include large multidisciplinary teams to address a broad range of technical and political issues which are inherent in planning and the environmental process. He first began as an agency planner working in the states of California, Maine, Colorado. And when he launched his planning consultant career, he also worked in California, Georgia, Nevada, Arizona, Venezuela, and the Dominican Republic. He has managed major projects such as the Redwood City Salt Works Project, Santa Rosa Long-Term Wastewater Project, Sutter Creek Gold Rush Ranch Project, South Tahoe Public Utility District Wastewater and Water Projects, Lake Tahoe Airport Master Plans, EIR, Environmental Impact Report, Environmental Initial Studies, the Heavenly Ski Resort Master Plan, the Nevada County General Plan and EIR, the Mariposa County General Plan and EIR, and the Arizona Military Airport Land Use Compatibility Program. Over the years, he has worked locally with the cities of Auburn, Davis, Dixon, Lodi, Rockland, Sacramento, and West Sacramento, Tahoe Regional Planning Agency. In those capacities, it was preparation of environmental documents associated with EIRs, master plans, general plans, and specific plans. He is currently a contract planner for the city of Sutter Creek and the town of Loomis, and he is currently managing the town of Loomis Costco project, and under separate contract provides staff augmentation services, including coordination of the town's general plan update process that we just started. He currently serves as a member of the Placer County Planning Commission, District 5. He has also served on the Meadow Vista Municipal Advisory Committee, and throughout the years of his service, his involvement with the American Planning Association, he has served as Vice President of the State and Local Affairs of the California Chapter, Northern Legislative Director, Director of the Sacramento Valley Section California Chapter, and also as Secretary-Treasurer of the Sacramento Valley Section American Institute of Planners. He is an experienced, detailed planning professional and has provided numerous presentations at local, regional, and state levels. He is the recipient of many American Planning Association awards and has worked on a plethora of projects and environmental issues over the years, all of which include public outreach and consent building. As the town of Loomis launches the general plan update, tonight's presentation will provide the importance of our town's land use element.
Now we can pay you.
If you ever have an opportunity, ask him about Marco Polo. One of his favorite pastimes. It's my honor to introduce you to Anders Hauge of Hauge, Bruick and Associates.
Thank you. That was long. But I guess 48 years doing this, your resume gets...
Yeah, it's hard to condense that.
Is the presentation on this computer?
Yes.
Okay, so... Yeah, where's the... to tell?
I have the flash drive as a backup.
Oh, you do. Well, I have a flash drive also, so.
So,
You don't put it in, but you can see it.
Yes.
turn that one.
Unless you have it on there somewhere. That I didn't see.
Okay.
I do.
Is it on
PowerPoint. Uh-oh, you don't have PowerPoint on. I could bring in my machine if necessary.
Ought to work.
While she's looking at that, she did bring along the general plan that was adopted in 2001, so we're almost 19 years with the town of Loomis general plan. And so it's one of the reasons the town is looking at updating, because the state law generally suggests that you update your general plan every 20 years. So in the presentation I talk about that. There's various updates that the state recommends, and they're worthwhile to go through. So let me see here. So the town is in the process of a general plan update, and we brought it out into a number of phases. The phase we're in currently is really the discovery phase, and a phase to take a look at the existing documents and look at their consistency with state law and with the codes and ordinances that are currently in the town, because one of the requirements for a general plan is that it's consistent internally and that all the other documents that are adopted by the town are consistent with the general plan. And we have found some inconsistencies just doing projects, and so we felt it's time, let's get that cleaned up. There's also data that can be updated. One of the things the town just did is, this is a updated land use map. It is done in GIS, so now we have the ability to start importing information into this process that will be used then in the general plan updates, such as utility information. There we go, we can do it. So this land use map has the current general plan as it currently has been adopted, and that is up on the city's website under the general plan area, so you can go and download it there and look at it. And as we generate more information within the general plan and the layers within the GIS, that will be made available. So one, go to SPMUD, find out where their jurisdiction, or where their ability to serve is currently and in the future. Saying I think we'll be able to, we're getting some information that we're sharing the GIS maps with a state agency looking at fire and fire hazards. They're going to have their information done in June, and they're going to provide us that information so we can put that into the layers. We'll be going to the county because I know they have wetland information and other information that we can put into the layers, and then begin using that to examine the existing conditions in the town of Loomis and, you know, where we want to go from there. So, find out your keys here. All right, one of the things that as we go in this process, the town is in the process of making decisions. Decision, do we keep the plan just the way it is, it works for us, or we need to tweak it a bit? And we're thinking right now there's some tweaks that need to go on just because it's been 20 years and things have changed. So we're looking at making sure that the town hears and respects all perspectives in an objective process, and same with the community, that you're also hearing and making objective decisions based on the information. I have stories. One of them, though, is we had a project in Santa Rosa that was mentioned, and somebody came in and said, you know, this wastewater that you're going to put into the Russian River, how about you take it up to the geysers and recharge those so we can have power? And we looked at it and said, it's going to be really expensive. That's a 3,000-foot lift. We have all kinds of pumps. We have to lift it up there, and just the operating of those pumps, we can't afford it. But we said we're going to keep it because it was a joint environmental process for CEQA and for NEPA. And under NEPA, you had to have a non-discharge alternative within your NEPA document. So that was a non-discharge, so we kept it. And we continued to look at that over time, along with, in that project, we looked at over 30 dams and reservoirs for storage of water in the Sonoma County area. At the very end of the process, Unical, who was operating the geysers, came forward and said, tell you what, we're going to give you free power to those 3 lift stations if you'll pump that up there and provide us water. And with that, you know, the project became very inexpensive, and they adopted it. And 2 of the power stations that had gone offline because of a lack of steam are online, and they've actually added another power station. So that is operating where the house power is driving those pumps, and additional communities have come on now for the discharge of water. So keeping an open mind to ideas that don't seem like they're going to work right to begin with, really keep the minds open, because you never know how they can weave around and actually become a project. Also be informed. So as I was saying, we're updating the information within the general plan, the setting sections of the general plan, and we'll be providing that online on the city's website for the general plan. But we want you to be informed also with that, and if you have information that we can use, that would be helpful. I was in Idaho visiting my granddaughter during the Planning Commission meeting when one of my staff members gave this presentation. And Miguel, I heard you said that the town had been working on a recreation element that I was not aware of, never adopted. The land use element does have recreation policies in it, but it's something, is that information that we should revise and relook at and bring into the general plan at this point in time. So it's a piece of information from the community that I think would be helpful for all of us. And then also base the decisions on a full consideration of sufficient and accurate information. It's one of the things in the projects I've worked on that are controversial, that if you get the facts and you sit down and you look at the facts, you can usually find a good solution amongst everybody who's participating in the general plan process. General plan process, some of you have seen this presentation, but fall winter of 2019 is consistency in evaluation and information gathering, and that's both internally at the staff and encouraging the community to generate information and take a look at the existing plan. If you like something and don't want to change it, let us know. You see there's an issue and you want to change it, let us know that also. Then we're also, during this period of time, going to be doing technical studies as we find issues that need to be addressed, and the town will put out contracts for technical studies to update that information. We know one of them will have to be the transportation element. It was updated in 2016, but with new state mandates on vehicle mile traveled analysis, we need to update that and see how that impacts us. Then the fall of now, through the summer of 2020, we're going to be asking for both agency and community input, so we're involved in that now. Part of that is educating the community on what the general plan process is, what the elements are. And then in the spring of next year, our hope is to actually do additional workshops with the community, presenting the information that we've gathered. Where are there issues that need to be addressed? Sharing that information, having workshops on which direction do we want to take given that information. So that will be happening next summer. And then what we'll do is take those documents to the Planning Commission, or we'll take that information to the Planning Commission, to the Town Council, and say, this is what we've heard from the community, you give us direction and we'll now draft the general plan based on the information that we have heard. Then we hope to have the plans, ordinances, standards in the spring, fall of 2020, draft EIR in that same time frame in the 2020-21, and then finally a final EIR and hopefully adoption of a plan in 2021. So it's a long process, but the intent is to gather the information and have the community involved as we make these choices. General plan requirements. So the state of California does have requirements for general plans. It includes a land use element, circulation, housing, conservation, open space, noise, safety, and not sure if there's another one after that. I don't think so. But these are mandatory. And what we have for the town of Loomis is a land use and community development element. Has the downtown plan in it. It has parks and recreation goals and policies in there, and the economic development in there. The circulation element was updated in 2016, housing element was updated in 2014, and now requires updating again. The town is talking with the county and doing a joint document so we can save some money and use resources in doing that. We did that with Amador County and Sutter County, Plymouth, Jackson, and it really worked out well to get, because a lot of the issues for housing, Loomis can't solve internally to the community. But within the county, there's an opportunity to solve housing issues. And so there are some things that we should resolve at a county level and other things that we can deal with here in the town of Loomis. Public services, facilities, and finance element is existing. Conservation of resources, which includes the natural resources, open spaces, and air quality. It also includes cultural resources, and then public health and safety, which includes safety and noise. So that's the existing town of Loomis general plan. And it has all the required components except the new ones. So why are we doing this? We have to expand or add elements. So the state of California requires an environmental justice element. This is to make sure that you don't put low-income housing right next to the railroad tracks, you know, and make sure that people have an opportunity for good housing in good locations, good recreation. Greenhouse gases, that will be part of air quality, land use, transportation, has to be addressed in the updated document. Vehicle miles traveled is a new standard that is used in the CEQA process for determining impacts on the roadway systems. But in order to have an impact, you have to have a threshold standard within the CEQA document, and that comes from the general plan. So the general plan has to set what is the standard for the town of Loomis for VMT. We also have a regional housing needs allocation. SACOG, the Sacramento Area Council of Governments, establishes that each year and every 5 years. And that's being done right now. We have a preliminary number that it goes from 139 to 189 affordable units are required in the town of Loomis, or a place for them to go. And I believe they have representatives coming to the town council on the 8th of October to make a presentation.
Yeah, next Tuesday, we're doing a joint council planning commission workshop with representatives from both the state housing and community development and SACO on the regional housing needs allocation.
And so part of that is just explaining how's that calculated and what does that mean for the town of Loomis. Then also, we'll be looking at expansion of existing elements of the existing general plan to meet the state requirements. So one of the things we're doing in our consistency analysis is looking at the state guidelines specifically, looking at how the town of Loomis general plan complies with those, and then where there's holes, we'll note these are holes that need to be filled in to be consistent.
I have a question.
Yes.
Backing up to the regional housing needs.
Yeah.
So I'm the director of the Loomis Senior Center.
Okay.
And so just a question about, can there be senior housing put into the general plan? Is that what would come under regional housing needs allocation?
No, regional housing needs allocation is based on incomes and affordability.
Okay.
But many general plans do include policies about senior housing, and especially when there's a need and you can identify what that need is. So that would be something that a goal, policy, implementation measure could go into the general plan to address senior housing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. And then also would be looking at doing that. Expansion of the existing elements, we'll look at what needs to be done as part of that presentation to the community before we go into the workshops and say this is what needs to be done. All right, relationship among elements. So this is right out of the state guidelines. So the relevant statutory issues must be addressed. So what's in the state guidelines we have to address. The elements have to reflect the characteristics of the town of Loomis. I believe your general plan reflects the town of Loomis. And so it's important to make sure that we maintain that reflection of the town of Loomis in the general plan when it's updated. There are examples of topics that we don't have to include, such as forest and timber resources or coastal resources, and there's a few others that the state says you have to look at, but we're not on the coast and we don't have any timber resources, so we won't be looking at those elements within the general plan. Also, the elements and issues need to be integrated and contain interrelated content. So as I said, VMT will be addressed in land use, it will be addressed in the air quality policies, it will be addressed in transportation and circulation, and probably public infrastructure, because there we're also talking about some of the signals and intersections and the width of the roads within the community. So they're integrated in some cases. In other cases, they're kind of standalone. So one of the things that you have to look at is flooding, so it will be addressed again in land use, housing, conservation, and safety. All of those elements of the general plan will be addressed. And also the elements and the issues have to be internally consistent. So it's one thing that the state likes to look at is, are you internally consistent with your element and your goals and policies amongst all the elements? So we'll be looking at that also. I think in our working with the general plan, there are some inconsistencies that we have found and we need to clean those up. Nothing horrible, but it just needs to be proper. One of the things that is really important, and I said this I think before the presentation, is the general plan is the town's constitution. That is where you have said this is what we want in the town of Loomis. And it's required by state law that your master plans, area plans, specific plans, your codes, your ordinances, any guidelines and standards all have to be consistent with the general plan. So as we're going through this consistency analysis, we're also looking at your standards, your guidelines, and other documents that have been adopted to make sure they're consistent. And if they're not consistent, then we have choices to make. How do we want to adjust one or the other to bring them into consistency? So we'll be doing that. But that's just really important to remember. One of the things I was thinking about the land use diagram there, while the general plan is your constitution, the land use diagram is a contract with the property owners. What the town has said is, this is the land uses that you can have on your property. This is our contract with you, that this is how you can use your property. So it's a guarantee to you, giving you some assurance of what is going to happen on your property, your neighbor's property. So looking at the land use diagram is also important to make sure that when that is updated, if it's updated, that is done in a way that does in fact respect the community, the landowners in the community, to allow them to proceed with development on their property or maintenance of their property. Yes?
Through this process, does the state have to give some kind of approval to our general plan update?
Only the housing element, but they do. I'll get in here and I'll show you where the state tracks what you're doing, and it may be the next one. Now, you know what? It was in my previous presentation. So we talked about there's a number of times that you can look at updating the general plan. Every year in April, the town is to submit to the state of California an annual progress report on the general plan. And it goes through and says, we have a policy that there's going to be X number of low-income houses. And you have to say, we have the zoning for that, but we don't have any houses built this year, or 5 were built this year, or whatever it was. And you go through. And so the state is reviewing your general plan and how you're accomplishing the general plan on an annual basis. And, the first time around, writing one of those things is cumbersome, but after a while, it's a little bit easier. But you take every goal and policy and say, how do we comply? Are we complying? Now, the other thing that is useful with that annual progress report is for the Town Council Planning Commission to look at it and say, is this still what we want to do? Is this the right path that we're on? Do we need to tweak things just a little bit? Do we need to fund some projects to make something happen? And it becomes, I look at it as a way for making sure you're on the right path, and for the council, when you're doing the budget, are we budgeting our resources in the proper manner, given circumstances? So it really becomes annual way to make sure you're on track with your general plan and to adjust it as necessary. And then they recommend a update every 5 years, and that's just because things change. And then definitely every 20 years because you're forecasting out 20 years with your general plan in the state. And I think it's probably true. It's hard to really know what's going to happen beyond 20 years. And so you do a general plan, you look at 20 years horizon, but you want to look at intervals. And then the implementation measures of the general plan are also, you have short-term implementation measures, those things that you should be doing within a year. You have midterm implementation measures, those should be done in 5 years. And then you have long-term that would be the 20 or plus, because some of the goals and objectives, it may take a long time to get there. So you have goals, policies, and implementation measures, and then you have a schedule to get those done. So one of the things in the annual progress report is, are we meeting our schedule? Are we achieving what we have to achieve? Yes.
If the state, let's say you have your general plan and you're just maybe into the first or second year, and the state comes out with some new requirements or regulations, are you mandated to change then that general plan, or would it be in the next general plan?
It all kinds of depends on what the state, maybe we can have that discussion. It really depends on how the legislation has been approved. A lot of times the general plan guidelines will give you a time frame when you have to get this done. So in the case of VMT, they are to be implemented by you have to have a discussion of VMT as of July 1st of 2019. By 2020, you have to have policies, but the State of California Office of Planning and Research doesn't have to give you guidelines on how to do those till I think 2023. So, it's kind of like the cities and the counties and the towns have to kind of figure out what we're going to do, and then somewhere down there, the State Office of Planning and Research will give you guidelines, and then you have to bring them into compliance. But if there is a new guideline or a new standard that you have to comply with, again, you can amend your general plan 4 times a year, no more. And so there's an opportunity to do that. So far, my experience with the state is they understand. You just don't turn around, if there's a new regulation, you just don't turn around and adopt something right away. Unless you feel it's important. If there's something that you said, this is important for the town of Loomis, we need to do this, you may want to adopt it a lot faster than that. But generally, the state gives the towns discretion on their implementation. Okay. Within the land use element, the fundamental decisions of the entire general plan start with the land use element, because you're putting land uses down in the community and what they're going to be. And it frames, as a land use map does, what the uses are and where they can be developed in the town. And the purpose is to promote thoughtful, equitable, and accessible distribution of land uses. So thoughtful, make sure that you have water or sewer or septic capacity, road capacity, whatever. So it should be thoughtful about where you place those things. And the element is used to a tool to improve the public health, reduce infrastructure costs, enhance the local economy, and address long-term issues. So in the general plan now, you have an economic element that talked about the things that you need for economic development in the community. You definitely have a number of policies regarding health and traffic and circulation. And the town's always looking at ways to reduce infrastructure costs, because those, not only the cost of building the infrastructure, but maintaining it is pretty expensive. So that's something that's always looked at. And then the land use element helps resolve conflicts and maybe has some trade-offs. So sometimes there may be some trade-offs that the town has to struggle with, and how do you want to proceed? So as you talk about the land use element, those should come up, and those discussions should occur before the Planning Commission and the City Council prior to adoption.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So again, my background is healthcare, and a lot of times we'll do case studies so that we can look at how we've managed, a particular case to see what areas, we could do better.
Yeah.
Is there ever any kind of exercise where you go back and you kind of look at some of the projects to see, this is how we did it, but honestly we could have done it better?
Every time a project is processed, we go through that process. And one of the things that Mary Beth is doing now is actually recording those things and keeping track of it so that, as a general plan update comes or something else comes up, we can remind ourselves, this was the issue, this was a conflict, how should we resolve it? I do know after a project is done, you'll sit down and say, what do we do right, what do we do wrong, what needs to be fixed? That's kind of done internally, but it may be something worthwhile with the Planning Commission to go through and just say, how'd this work and what do we need to adjust to make it work better in the future? I think that could be useful. Required content. You have to designate the general distribution, location, and extent of uses on your land use diagram. So what does that mean? You have to indicate where the housing, business, and industry is going to go in the community, and you have all those. You need to indicate where the open space, including watersheds, natural resources, and recreation are within the community. You need to show the recreation facilities and opportunities for recreation, your educational facilities, public buildings, solid waste and liquid waste facilities, which generally now are carried out of the community, but you have to acknowledge where they're going, and then greenways within the community. So those are all required content in the land use element. Density intensity, and I know there's some discussion at the Planning Commission on this, but you need to accommodate Loomis' share of the regional housing need, which is this RHNA, Regional Housing Need Analysis. You also have to designate a population density, and that's the number of people in a given area, and it's not dwelling units. So there's a couple of ways general plans and land use elements calculate capacities. One is by the number of people, the other might be by the number of housing units or the square footage of commercial. So those are all ways of looking at it. Now, building intensity does look at dwelling units per acre, and your land use element does designate the number of units per acre by each land use category. It also designates a floor area ratio, which is basically a planner way of, if you have a commercial property and you decide to use the whole area of that commercial property, say 1 acre, but you want to go up 3 stories, the floor area ratio then would be 3 to 1. So it's basically 3 stories to 1. And so it's just a way, especially in intense areas, where you can determine just how much the land coverage is on the property. It also has to talk about the lot coverage. Your general plan land use diagram, or land use element does. One of the inconsistencies is one table has one coverage and the text has another coverage, and we have, if anybody knows why those are different or what the reason was for having different coverages, that would really be helpful to us to understand where we go forward. What's that?
Somebody said, hey, wouldn't 65% coverage be nice? And they, okay, that's in the general plan, seriously.
Okay.
In the zoning ordinance, because I was very adamant about, it's 50%.
Yep.
And so that's...
Well, even in the land use element, there's text that talks about 30 to 40%, and then there's a table that talks up to 60%, and it's kind of like, which is it? And we're in this process, we're going to have to kind of make that decision, which do we want, and I would like to know, why do we want to do this? I mean, and I understand, I've seen that before, like 65 sounds good, but some justification why we're doing that, I think would be helpful in this process. And we also have to talk about lot size. So there's minimum lot sizes, so the higher the density, the lower the minimum lot size. And the intensity standards may include provisions for flexibilities as density bonuses, cluster zoning, plan unit developments, which your element does allow for. Also, the land use element has to have a build-out analysis, and that's a realistic development capacity, vacant land, constrained land, land required for public services, potential infill. And I think, Jean, you asked a question at the Planning Commission meeting about calculating those. And the one thing that's important, there's what I call a maximum density, which is you have allowed X units per acre times the number of acres of the land use category will give you the maximum capacity of the town of Loomis. And why is that important? Just in case you want to make sure that you have utilities, services, power, roadways to ever complete with that, because if you don't think about that into the future, one thing that's really important to me is always maintain right of way. If you think you're going to have a 3-lane road someday, make sure you get the right of way today. If you want what I call class 1 bus pullout someday, make sure you have the right of way for that. So always make sure you have right of way for these facilities so that in the future they're available. So the example there is in the Folsom General Plan, there are people who wanted to convert the old railroad tracks into a biking path. And we said, let's hold off because there's a real opportunity for light rail to come in here. And they said, light rail will never come to Folsom. But we kept that. And guess what? Light rail is in Folsom because the right-of-way was there. And so having the right-of-way and not having to purchase that and the high cost of that. So those are the kinds of things you want to, you look at that full build-out and okay, what are we going to need a full build-out? Let's make sure we have those things. And then part of this realistic capacity is, figure that seems to work pretty well for me is if you have, say, full build out of a parcel, in reality, you're only going to get about you're going to reduce that by about 25% because of roads, utilities, could be slopes, it could be wetlands, there's other things that it could be. So generally you can take your maximum build out with all the uses in the town, reduce it by 25%. And it was interesting, at the Planning Commission in Sutter Creek, with the GIS, we had done that calculation, and the commissioner said, well, I want to know parcel by parcel. Go take a look, what's there, what's not there. And so we did that analysis. The difference between the two numbers was 50. So it's kind of amazing that overall 25% reduction kind of just worked as a broad number for that. And then the other thing is future population. So how that's generally calculated is from your build out times the average persons per dwelling unit. And I haven't looked at what the State Department of Finance says it is for Loomis, but my guess is somewhere on average 2.3 to 2.5 persons per house is that average. So you take the dwelling units times the 2.5 and you come up with a potential population in the town. Land use diagram, it designates the distribution on the map. It also shows the location and extent of those land uses. It may set minimum and maximum density standards, which you do currently. And there may be specific areas, districts, neighborhoods, or corridors that can be identified on the diagram in addition to the land use diagram for special projects. One of the things I know the county of Placer is doing right now is designating trails throughout the county, and their intent is to have trails from Lake Tahoe all the way down to the Sacramento River along the American River Bike Path, and they actually have shown where that can happen. And so those are some of the special areas that you can show on your land use diagram and plan for it. So if you have a project come in, you say, here's a piece of land we need, for that kind of a facility. So again, planning ahead, thinking far ahead. Sometimes you may get them right away, sometimes you may not, but at least you've thought about it. So this is the same map showing those land use designations as they currently exist, and talking about special areas. One of the things you'll see here is there are special areas designated in the general plan. Special area 3 here actually provides for high-density housing, low-income housing, up to 170 units, but no less than 129 units. And that was part of the RENA agreement with Housing Community Development in the last go-around with the RENA numbers. So those are some of the special areas you currently have. Potential focus areas. Because of the referendum, I think it's appropriate for the community to take a look at those properties and make a determination what's the appropriate land use. The land use didn't change with the referendum, the zoning did. So the land uses are there. And just so you know, I just wrote a staff report today that will be up online, I think, by Thursday on the general plan, existing zoning, compatible zoning on all those properties, just to to take a look at what's potential. So there are some properties that have existing uses that you can build right now. There's other properties in this area that would take a rezoning in order to build anything because of the referendum. Turtle Island is there because there's been some people coming in wanting projects that didn't really meet the desires or the land use. I know the opportunity, at one time, Bass Pro Outlet was looking at that site, and that was kind of what it was intended for, is my understanding, but that's gone now. So the question is, how many more opportunities like a Bass Pro can go on that site? So the question is, do we want to keep that in its existing land use designation, or do we look at other designations that may be appropriate for Loomis today? And I know one of those was senior housing, that somebody's coming and said, can you do it? And some senior housing can go there, but not on all of it. So I think those are good discussions for the town to have about what uses do you want on that property. RENA sites have to be identified, and then additional areas will come forward as we do the consistency analysis and information gathering, and we're going to identify those. So our intent is next spring is to have a document to say, here's where the inconsistencies are, here's the information we've gathered, you know, here are the questions that need to be answered by the town. It's a starting base for that community discussion and workshops. Anyway, there is an email, so you can send email comments to gpuupdate@loomiscalifornia.gov. We also, we didn't bring forms tonight, but there are forms at the town that you can fill out, mail in, or drop off. Also, if you want, call up Mary Beth and set up an appointment to have meetings and discussions of information that we can incorporate. And then also workshops and hearings, and tonight is one of those. But if there's other groups who would like the town to come and talk about the process and where we are, we'll be more than happy to do that. And I think I took some of your time.
I got a question or
Yes.
comment. Can you go back one slide, please?
Let me find the back arrow here. Yes.
The terminology referendum properties is going to be real vague to all the people in the town of Loomis. If you want to call it referendum properties, why don't you put in villages so people know what the referendum properties are? That seems to kind of, I mean, everybody, I don't know why I call them referendum properties, it's the villages.
Well, the thing, in the staff report, I did exactly that. Referendum properties, the villages of Loomis. I did, but the reason is the villages is no longer, it's gone. You know, it was gone. So these are a group of properties in this area that we thought, let's recognize the villages doesn't exist, that doesn't anymore, but there is general plan designations, and you can see on the map they're up there, including that huge piece of open space and some residential. And so I guess that's one of the reasons was we're not talking about the villages. That concept is over. So
No, I'm just saying though, from the general public, nobody, well, very few people, if you asked them right now, where's the referendum property? I don't know. If you asked them where are the villages?
Yeah.
They definitely wouldn't know. So,
So in the staff report, I did say that the villages, plus we have graphics to show where all the parcels are.
And the other question, you mentioned that there is a PD zone in the current general plan.
There is the allowance for a PD designation, I believe. I thought not so much in the zoning, but I think in the general plan.
There is no PD zone in the general plan. That was one of the issues that was for the election, so to be clear, and that was turned down.
Okay.
So right now, the town of Loomis does not have a PD zone.
Okay.
It's kind of important in the referendum properties.
Okay.
There's an allowance, there is an allowance for, to create one, but there isn't.
There isn't one, okay, yeah. And the state does say that you should be able to allow that, but okay, there's not one. Good.
Call it the Measure C and D properties.
There you go. That's better.
People would know what that is.
Possibly could. Yeah, we tried finding a name that was representative of that area, and you know, so I came up with referendum properties, but we did say the villages so people know. Yes?
If the villages have been vaporized, why hasn't Turtle Island?
Because it didn't,
Still called that.
I believe because I don't know if there's ever been a proposal on that, but there was, and that's where Turtle Island came from? Okay. No, there was never a referendum. It's just that nothing ever came of the application.
There was an election. We voted on,
To allow Rosenhauer to have free reign on what they
Yeah,
want to do on the property.
There was an election where the developer had set up all the criteria that they could develop, and it could not be, it was like a PD zone.
Yeah,
And it
yeah.
could not be contested by the town if it passed. And it didn't pass.
Oh, that's interesting.
But wasn't it called Turtle Island before all those discussions?
Yeah, but because they said,
Well, that was their name based on
They did.
the project.
Well, we could always come up with a new name, but I think everybody kind of knows where it is. Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
And get Charles's presentation pulled up, I'm not sure.
It was there before.
Yeah. We saw
There you go. There you go.
Does he have it?
So I'm really thrilled to bring Charles Anderson into Loomis. He is with the League of California Cities. He is the Regional Public Affairs Manager and our legislative representative for a region. And as we were talking earlier, his focus is actually being a voice for the rural communities. For those who aren't familiar with the League of California Cities, essentially it is an advocacy group that allows all city and town officials to be able to pull together, to be able to, advocate as a unit for, local rights to expand and protect local government. And so it is my pleasure to have Charles give us an update on legislation with a focus on housing, because there was a lot of activity there this year.
Sure was. Okay, so it's been a really busy year this year. But first of all, I want to remind everyone, let's see here. I want to remind everyone that the legislative session, it ended on September 13th. There's a little bit more time for the governor to do some good work or some damage to the state of California. We have until October 13th for him to sign or veto bills. Most of the bills that I'm going to talk about today, they're sitting on his desk. And part of the reason why they're sitting on his desk is because I think his administration and the leadership of the legislature are still trying to determine what a good package of housing legislation would look like. But we're real hopeful on a few of them. So this year we've had some challenges, but we've managed to mitigate most of those over this past year. We were able to secure major funding in the budget for affordable housing, which addressed some homelessness issues and also some local planning. There's money there to provide some resources to help with local planning, including the general plan updating process. We've also been able to secure significant due process provisions in the housing element related to provisions of the trailer bill, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. And then also we stalled aggressive mandatory housing density bills for the year. Many other bills of concern were amended or sidelined. And regarding the density stuff, he's still adamant that the only way we're going to get, and when I say he, I meant the Governor Newsom, he's pretty determined that California needs to increase its housing supply, and I think everyone would agree that we could use some more housing. The debate is primarily on what the best way to do that is. So back again with Governor Newsom. We started this year, he came in and he was really strong that he wanted some good housing. He wanted to increase the housing supply in California. He wanted to increase affordable housing. He wanted to reduce homelessness and provide services for the homeless population. And then one of the ideas that he had when he first started was that he wanted to have 3.5 million new units by 2025. When we look at the rate of housing development in California, how it's went, and looked at the current, the prior arena numbers, that we've seen. California already wasn't meeting its housing goals. And then when you added this on, these 3.5 million units onto all of that, the League of California Cities said, you know, under the state, the current state of how things are, we're not going to be able to, this isn't a way to do that. And so he went back and he was thinking that, well, perhaps maybe we just need some sticks and we need to like prod local government to build these houses. And then we had to quickly go back and said, well, cities don't build houses, businesses build houses, developers build houses. All we can do is provide avenues for them to do that, but obviously we also have to cover our costs. California, as you know, has a limit on its property taxes. It can't, you know, we can't increase them like many other states do, and so we really rely on the fees that we charge for these development projects. So we explained that to him, and he wanted to tie it to transportation funding. As many of you may be aware, there's a significant new funding stream for transportation, and he thought that could be one of the sticks. And he said perhaps if we withheld funds, transportation funds, that maybe that would get local government to build houses. And again, we had to remind him, local government doesn't build houses. We do the zoning, we do the planning, land use, we do all of that kind of stuff. We don't actually build the houses. Businesses build the houses. And so what we also said is, in a downturn in the economy, now you've set up the legislation so that we can't build, that we won't receive certain transportation dollars if we don't build the houses, but it's not a housing building climate. We're not gonna get the houses built. So now what? So now our roads continue to crumble, potholes are getting larger, mass transit is losing way to other modes of transportation. And so we did a significant part of the first part of the year really trying to explain to his new administration kind of how the housing process works, house building process works. We thought we were pretty successful at that. It wasn't too long before that proposal to link it to transportation funding was dropped. But what we also saw, in addition to the administration, we saw that housing was also a top priority for the legislature. And so we saw that as perhaps there's some avenues that we can be proactive in, and then also that they would maybe perhaps come up with some ideas of their own that maybe we could work with them on and actually start to get some housing built. 3 bills, SB 50, SB 4, and AB 1279 are 2 years bills, and they're part of about 150 housing and land use related bills that were introduced this year. So that's a big chunk. That's unusual for the legislature. The legislature runs about 2,000 bills a year. And so 150 of those were directly related to housing. There are some other key bills that were amended significantly to reduce their impacts to local government. And then in addition to that, there were some trailer bills that enabled this $2.5 billion in funding to address California's housing and homelessness crisis. I'm going to talk a little bit about that, what that does. So this isn't an ongoing funding source, but it does really provide it provides a good stream of funding to start taking care of some of these issues, addressing affordability and addressing homelessness. So it establishes some incentives to encourage cities and counties to increase their housing production. It also establishes a court process for a court to determine that a city or county has complied with their housing element law. And it also imposes penalties as a last resort if they don't comply. So you may recall that early in the year, I think it might have been January, Newsom got a hold of everyone's housing elements and a whole list and said who's certified and who's not and why aren't they certified, and if they're not certified, we're going to sue you. And so there were a couple places that were made examples of, but it showed that primarily cities their housing elements have been certified. But what came out of that was that they said perhaps we need another process because local government said, it's HCD's the one that's, we think our housing element's fine. It's HCD's just coming up with stuff on their own. We don't even know what their process is behind the door, how they determine whether or not we're in compliance or not. And so some cities, we've specifically heard from some cities that said we think that we're in compliance, we don't know what we're supposed to do, and they come back and they want us to make some changes, and we make some changes. Anyway, so it goes back and forth. I think it was 70 something cities that weren't found not in compliance out of nearly 500 incorporated cities. Yes, ma'am.
You called it HD, what was it?
Oh, HCD, Housing Community Development Department for the state of California.
And in compliance, that means that they didn't have the proper zoning for the housing, is that correct?
Oh, it could have been, I think there was a number of reasons. It was very, we at Mayors and Council Members Executive Forum we brought in anybody who wasn't in compliance. We offered them an opportunity to sit down and talk to the Executive Director for the League of California Cities, along with the League President and some staff members, and say, we wanted to know directly from their mouths why they weren't in compliance. And actually, now that I think about it, it might have been not the executive forum, it might have been the city manager's department conference, now that I think about it. Why weren't you in compliance? And it ran the gamut. It was just, everybody had a different story about why they weren't in compliance. Some of them said, it's just about a matter of, they're in the HCD has the paperwork even, and we're just waiting on them basically. But it could have been a lot of different things. So what came out of that though was that in the budget, then they put a provision in there basically saying if a city is not in compliance with their housing element, or if their housing element isn't certified, then we have the right, the state of California has the right to sue that city, and we'll sue you, and we'll get you to get in compliance. And that at first may be off-putting to local government because now it's just HCD being heavy-handed, but we saw it as an opportunity to take it out of HCD's hands, get it into the court system, and have a judge require HCD to prove why the housing element wasn't in compliance. And then the judge would make a ruling, and then in that ruling would say, here, these are the steps you need to take to come into compliance. And so the League of California Cities saw that as a great opportunity because we felt HCD wasn't, in some cases, being fair and reasonable. So part of that, though, has a penalty part. So let's say a city gets sued by the state of California, and they go to court. The judge makes a determination, a ruling, and says these are the steps you need to take to come into compliance. At that point, then the city goes and doesn't do it. They just blow it off. Maybe they're really tight on resources or whatever the issue is. After a certain amount of time, then the judge can fine them a certain amount of money per month. And so then until they come into compliance. Then if they still refuse to come into compliance, then the fines can go up, and then there's another opportunity for them to come up. But the whole thing doesn't even start for a whole year. So cities and counties have a year to basically follow the judge's orders and come into compliance. And so we saw that as a good opportunity because it makes the steps very clear. It takes it out of the hands of HCD. So those are the main things in there. There was also some grants that were in there. So that was kind of the part that provides cities and counties, I think, a little bit of reassurance, saying like, if we're having a problem, let them take us to court and we'll have the judge solve it. But in addition to that, because there's $2.5 billion sitting out there, so there's some programs that were started from that, and one of them is a local government planning support grants program. That's $250 million. It goes to regions, cities, and counties for planning activities to accelerate housing production and facilitate implementation of RENA. And $125 million that goes to the councils of governments and other regional entities. And then $125 million to cities and counties. And then that's based on population, which is generally what they do. So Then there's also the infill infrastructure grant program. That one's $500 million. And it provides competitive funding for quality infill projects or qualifying infill areas. And then there's also money in there for homelessness funding and programs. One of them is the Homelessness Housing Assistance and Prevention Program. And that's actually a fairly substantial sum of money. It's $650 million for one-time grants to cities, counties, and continuums of care to support regional coordination and to expand or develop local capacity to address immediate homelessness challenges. Then the last thing on here of note is the low barrier navigation centers. That's part of the continuum of care to make sure that there's a suite of tools, resources available for people who are homeless. And it makes it easily accessible so they don't have to go to a bunch of different places to try to get different services. So that's basically like, that was a big deal for us because we feel like that can really get things started in the right direction with regards to affordable housing and starting to make inroads on the homelessness issue. So this year though, for legislation, so we have, this is a big one for the League of California Cities, SB 5. I may even be the only one we're actually asking for a signature in this list of bills, but it creates a local partnership. It creates the Affordable Housing Community Development Investment Program. And this measure creates a legacy state program to empower bold and sustainable action, and it stimulates additional local and private investment that will propel significant investments in urban infill, transit-oriented development, and affordable housing to further the state's ambitious climate and affordable housing goals. And specifically, there's a chunk of money in there for that. But there's also some, one of the good things that I think the public would enjoy or appreciate though is that it also includes a strong state oversight and accountability provision. We were talking about this about local government, cities having to do reports for everything and provide them to the state of California. But in some cases, it can be very useful because it's a tool for them to gauge the effectiveness of different programs. And so that's one of these. I think that's one of these cases. Then these other ones.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
Is it generally through like a competitive grant process, or how do they distribute the funding?
Normally, yeah, they do it, and this is just in general. I'm not too sure about how this specific one lays out, but normally a lot of times it's based on population. I think for some reason it's popping up in my mind that this one's population based. So as you would expect in a population-based scenario, Little Loomis compared to LA, is going to get hardly anything. And it can make it hard for some communities, and there are along the I-5 corridor. We have small cities all along Interstate 5 that have a huge homelessness issue. And they, meanwhile, won't get many of the resources to do that. And then with regard to affordable housing, they may have some money in there to help them update their general plans and to be able to try to incorporate new ways of providing affordable housing. But then it's not going to be enough probably in some cases. This is just me talking about how we went through transportation and another bunch of other issues, is it makes it really hard for small rural communities to get enough money to put a project together, to provide the incentives, to get a developer to come out to their community and do a good project. It could be senior housing, it could be assisted living, it could be low income housing, and so that's a lot of times that's how it happens. One of the things though that they generally put in there though is they also provide some grant opportunities. The problem is that small communities don't have the resources on staff to be working on trying to find sources of money. And so a lot of communities, I try to remind communities that there are a lot of people, consultants out there that do grant writing that is specific to these things. There's somebody out there that knows where all the housing grants are. There's somebody out there that knows where all the transportation grant, and they're already doing them for other communities, and so it makes it pretty easy for them. And so I always recommend that very small cities that have limited resources probably get somebody to take on that, to find the money. And you really need somebody to try to find the money so that some of these projects, more of these projects can happen. But one of the things that can be taken advantage of, so here's the other thing, is that we still don't know if the governor's even going to sign this one. I'm not a lobbyist, I'm on the public affairs side. So Jason Ryan in our office, he handles the housing area. And he had said on the call on Monday that they've been pretty quiet, and he feels like they're holding out to try to see if they got the right package together and what they're going to do for next year. But that he believes that there's a 60-40% chance that this actually gets signed into law this year, that he signs it rather than vetoes it. 60%, that means that's I don't know, that's not very comfortable. I mean, that's not that far, to me that's not far to 50-50 in a coin toss, you know. So that's coming from him, so I think he's pretty optimistic. So yeah, I don't know. The problem is that they're already they supplied us with $2.5 billion in funding already for many of these issues. And so they're like, do we also want to do an ongoing program that provides $2 billion in additional funding? And we try to tell him, well, what we need is exactly that. We need an ongoing source of revenue. We don't need one-time funding is great. That kicks a lot of things off the ground, gets them running, gets the ball rolling. But what we really need is affordability's not going away. It's always going to be an issue, and we need a long-term stream, and we need long-term solutions. And this can help. And so we've been doing a lot of trying to convince him that to sign it. He has until October 13th, so he's got about 2 weeks. These I'll go through real fast since we're getting shorter on time now. So these next one here with tenant protections. The League of California Cities, it's easy for us to support because that doesn't so much impact local government as it impacts the businesses, the landowners, the property owners, property management firms. But these right here, one of them, kind of makes sense. It's like, if you're getting a subsidy from the state, which that's part of that $2 billion, that's part of that $2.5 billion, is to provide these resources. We don't want people being discriminated against where they can't even live in their community because there isn't anybody to rent to them. And so this particular bill, the League of SB 329, the League is supporting for that reason is because there's a lot of money out there, and we need to make sure that these people are allowed to have a place to stay. Then the other one, this one to me, a landowner or a property manager can find a way to work around this one. This expands existing notice requirements to 90 days if the rent increases more than 10%. What do? They make it 9.9%, and then they're good, right? So I don't know how effective this will be, but I think it's something that that's helpful, I think. Then under this one, SB 330, this one declares a statewide housing crisis, and for a 5-year period freezes nearly all development-related fees once a developer submits a preliminary application, including essential project-specific fee. The short of it is what the League of California Cities is afraid of, so we're asking for a veto on this. What we're afraid of is that somebody comes in and all they have to do is submit the application. A developer just has to submit the application. Even if there could be tons and tons of problems with it, and maybe all it was is that they heard that the city's reevaluating their fees or something, so they quickly get their application in, and then they get to sit on it for 2.5 years. And so it doesn't provide anything it doesn't cause things to get built. It doesn't cause the developer to build anything. All it just says is that they don't have increases in their fees even if they sit on it for 2.5 years. So the league wants a veto on that one. This one regarding density bonuses. So density bonuses are a good one of I think local government's strongest tools to incentivize housing in addition to there's these other concessions that they can make. So this one right here has under specific circumstances, if they're going to do a 100% affordable housing project, then they can get an 80% density bonus. The league is requesting a veto of this because the problem is that it I don't know if it's actually it's not this one. The problem is that and you'll see, and that goes on with these other ones. The problem that we're having with some of this legislation is that it causes local government to give up its authority to plan and determine land use. And not only that, but to help determine what's in the best interest of its community. Some of these basically turn over that land use authority to the developers. And we see that as that's an erosion of a very important authority that local government has. And so you'll see on this one too, the league is also requested a veto on this. Now ADUs, accessory dwelling units, what I think we used to call granny flats, or a place where you could stick your adult children in. It's expensive, right? Those are actually two legitimate things. People who are on fixed income and people who aren't old enough to have a good income. So it's not, the league is not against these accessory dwelling units. The problem is that there's a cost. Okay, so if you have more people in a home, if you have more cars parked on the street, if you have all these different things going on, it utilizes more resources. It uses the roads more, it uses the sidewalks more, and so it uses the water and sewer more. And so that's probably the major problem, is that there is a cost to this. There's a cost to the community through the city. And so how do we allow these ADUs, but also recognize that there's a legitimate cost to these?
I didn't understand the previous
Okay.
about the developer's bonus, density bonus.
Yes.
So I'm not quite sure I fully understand that. But if a developer's coming in and says he wants to put in 100 houses, what's the bonus part of it?
You could probably actually answer that.
Basically, if you could say that you're going to get a density bonus if you build affordable housing,
Okay,
and you get 10%. So out of 100, now you get 110 units that you can build there, and that is the intent is by building more units, you reduce your costs, and therefore they can become affordable.
Okay, so then that he shrinks down his square footages on property so that he can squeeze in that extra. Or goes higher. Okay.
So I think it pertains specifically to affordable housing, because what the developers will say is that it's too costly to build. And so then there's not usually a whole lot of community benefits that they can provide. So this is an incentive for them to be able to get more.
I got that part. I just wasn't sure on the math for how it works actually on a parcel.
Yeah, I think really it comes down to, I think it has to deal with the zoning, right? So if you have your ordinance says this is what high density is, right? Or multifamily housing is.
Yeah, 60 to
Then it's saying, okay, yeah, we'll allow
A percentage higher density.
But this isn't saying 10%, it's saying 80%.
Why?
Yep.
So in other words, nearly double.
Yeah, and so what happens is that can have a huge impact on the community, because let's say you don't have it honestly at that density it's probably multi-story. It's multi-story there, but you're not zoned. You're not really, your zoning or the location that it's at was never intended to have a multi-story building there for multifamily housing. Something else had been planned, and so it can cause a lot of problems, and that goes back to cities and counties losing the authority to control that, and the control going to the developers to make the determination.
Just a kind of in the weeds question on this one.
Yes.
Does that also deal with setback? Does that proposal deal with setbacks or?
Well, I don't know if it deals specifically with setbacks, but it does, incentives and concessions have to come into play a lot of times, because maybe that your land use, what is that, the land use agreement? No, I can't think of the right word. But let's say that you're supposed to have a certain setback, right? Or your driveways are supposed to be a certain size, or you have to have a certain number of parking spaces.
Easements for utilities.
Right, so you have all of these different things, and that means that the city, so that they can get that density, would have to make some concessions on that. And it could be zero lot line properties where there, none of the properties are zero lot lines.
It'd be almost like a land unit development. The developer would establish the criteria to be able to develop on that property.
Yes, rather than, what's been decided by the community. All right, so these three ADU bills, the league has requested a veto on them. Again, it's not because the league is against ADUs, it's because it gives too much authority to the developers.
Question on that though, Charles, when it says they can't charge, that doesn't include like water and sewer hookups, or would it include water and sewer hookups?
For
now you're
fees?
talking big money.
It's just any of the impact fees. So I don't know what the extent of impact, what all impact fees cover, but
sometimes your sewer fees, your water fees will include some impact fees in there, so it could be a portion of those could not be charged, so it'd have to.
Not the regular fee.
But the actual cost is not an impact fee, that's the cost of doing something. So if there's an additional fee looking to the future or solving another problem, then that would be gone. Yeah, these are kind of scary.
So these, like this one here, probably AB 881s wouldn't impact. I don't think that'd impact Loomis really too much. But this one really, really would have a big impact on city's ability to determine land use. This one, I think this is the last one here, requires local jurisdiction to provide public information regarding zoning ordinances, development standards, fees, exactions, and affordability requirements. The league wants a veto on this one because it's not that, basically they want a bunch of information up on the website, and cities are pretty good, they'll put ordinances and things like that. The problem is that it puts the standardization, puts all the requirements, and if HCD wants something else up there at any time, they can request something else to be up there. And we see it as just a way for HCD to start digging its hands into each and every individual city. We feel like there's a way to have this information made available, but we need to have some flexibility for individual cities. I'm not going to talk about these two-year bills really, other than that the league is opposing one of these, the SB 50, and then the league is watching these other two. They're two-year bills, so I don't need to talk about them because they're still out there and they're going to be talked about again next year. So that's all I have. Thank you.
I have a question. So, one of the things talked about, let's say, something favorable for like greenhouse emissions and reducing traffic and so on. And I was wondering how that plays into, developers love to tell you that there's a housing crisis. And so in the developments that I see filling in this area, from Rockland to south of 50 heading towards Elk Grove and so on, in those big open lands, is, I would say so completely inconsistent with any sort of reduction in greenhouse emissions or anything. I mean, if there are trees, they are all gone, and the houses are built with such density with no thought to.
So it's just really what the least expensive thing was to get the highest density possible in there.
Exactly, and yet in so doing, I mean, I understand the need for certain densities, but you have to drive so far to get to a lot of these developments that it's only increasing traffic, and there's no sort of like micro-urban feeling where, you know, none of those people that live in those houses could, let's say, walk to a store,
Yeah.
you know?
The cities have, and this is really, this comes.
So how is that being addressed?
So for years now, the League of California Cities, and I think in cities in general in California, have moved to considering more and more how do you have sustainable, livable communities that have mixed-use zoning, that have transit-oriented development, et cetera, et cetera. The big issue is, I think, what's going on right now is because there's such a sense of urgency, and the legislators are out there like, I need to look like I'm doing something on housing, right? So a developer comes in, right? Maybe he was a donor or not, I don't know. And he comes in and he says, I got a great idea for you. This will work great. It's gonna really help, you know?
Yeah.
But meanwhile, it's self-interested, and they're kind of taking advantage of it. And that's why you've seen these bills. There are a lot of developer proposed bills out there, and that's the reason why they're like, we got solutions for you. We got lots of solutions for you. You know, and some of it would work.
There's like no creativity, and there's no, like, for
Yeah.
example, in El Dorado Hills, right next to an office park where there should be, you know, homes for young families, they're putting, you know, senior communities next to an office park. So
Yeah.
are they going to be able to take advantage of having their jobs close by? No,
That
they're
could-
gonna
yeah.
sit there and complain about the office park.
And that's why, and it comes back to, you know, as you guys, as you go through the process of updating the general plan, those are the kinds of things that communities have to think about. That is part of the purview of local government. And that's what we're trying to protect, because the way the developers are going are trying to get more of what you're talking about. But communities, cities really are trying to think about how we have these good, healthy, livable communities. How do we have people close to their jobs? How do we have people close to their schools? How do we have safe bikeways, pathways, walking ways? How do we have those? How do we incorporate those? Still, obviously, we have to have room for cars, but how do we incorporate these other elements to make it a healthier community and a happier, and what we believe would be a happier community? And that's part of what, you know, I mean, going down the road, you know, as cities update their, because a lot of cities are in the same position as Loomis now. You know, they're going through this process of updating their general plan, and they're going to be considering those. They should be considering those things.
It seems to me there's a real disconnect between, you know, a lot of the development of houses, they build, you know, more houses, we need more houses, and transportation to accommodate the houses. And you just mentioned about, you know, road space. There isn't going to be, there is not enough space for more roads. And I think the state needs to somehow get ahead of itself and start advancing some transportation and a bicycle lane in entire communities and walkable is all fine. But in terms of things like getting RT to come up the road, and it's difficult and expensive. We have a train that comes through town and we can't get it to stop, and there's reasons for that. And so I think some of those solutions, in order to address the housing problem, getting communities to want to buy into, allowing more houses, because one of our referendum properties, that was one of the biggest issues was transportation. Had we had better transportation solutions, people might have been more amenable to actually accepting a project like that. But the transportation is unacceptable, and I don't see any movement in terms of legislation or that much from the league. There is some, but not enough to make that connection.
But we have, and if you look at the budget bill that was passed into this $2.5 billion, there's a substantial amount of that actually is for different modes of transportation. There is money in that to try to help incentivize getting that stuff out there. The League of California Cities also has been working on these other modes of transportation, right? We have, you know, people have scooters and bikes and motorized bikes, and so we have been doing some things. There's always more that we can do, but that again goes back to your own individual communities. How important is it to your community to have these kinds of things, and trying to encourage your city to, you know, look for these grants, and you know, and the problem is also like, especially small communities, they have limited resources. Okay, they can't focus on every single thing, and so they have to prioritize. And And so it really comes down to the community, how you guys want to prioritize, how your council wants to prioritize its resources to solve whatever the issues are, work on whatever it is. There are plenty of communities that do a lot of, I wouldn't say Davis is the most bike. They have a lot of bikes there. It's not designed for a bike. They've kind of what's that?
A lot of young people.
Yeah. They've got, well, they're very known for all their biking and stuff, but the community was not designed for that. So that's another issue, is trying to retroactively put in these other things, because you mentioned these planning ahead. You got to plan ahead. If you're going to have a bus stop somewhere, you think you're going to have a bus stop somewhere, you have to plan ahead. You should plan ahead for that, because it's going to be a lot harder to go back retroactively and put that back in some circumstances. Roads were pretty narrow back in the day, and over time cities have widened these roads to allow to accommodate the greater use of vehicles. But that's back to, again, it's the communities really have to make it a higher priority.
One more point to throw out there is a frustration point, because growing up, I remember when school busing was widespread and very popular. And actually, I was a school bus driver in college, and the high school in Napa was lined up for one end of the campus to the other with buses and kids getting off. And I understand the culture has changed, but it was facing the whole problem. That's just something for people to think about, is if there was any way to kind of.
Well, it's going to keep coming up. California as a state in general, the cities that are in it are all looking for new solutions to some of these issues.
Just one comment. Having been born and raised in San Jose about 60 years ago, and moving up here 40 years, at least in San Jose, they've got new freeways, they've got expressways and those types of things. The Sacramento region, look, is there any freeways planned? And the answer is no. There might be one, if you want to call it, from Elk Grove around the back to Rancho Cordova, but otherwise, there's nothing planned. We're going to add, South Placer County, 170,000 people in 10 years or so. So the traffic is really great. I think that's something where the cities in our region need to get together and start pushing Caltrans in the state. They need to start planning freeways for the future somehow.
Yeah. Well, that comes down to SACOG's got that primary regional role to be looking at those, and they actually have a map, like a 20-year or 50-year map or something that's supposed to be planning for those exact things. And if they're not, that's why, I believe all the cities in Placer County, are members of SACOG.
Right.
Yeah. That's one of the things, somebody should be on there in SACOG harping on that and say, are we paying attention to this?
Yeah, because it's not really, when you look at the growth, it's, one example is going to be 23,000 people living at the end of Sierra College in 193, and that's being developed right now. There's a lot more area around us, West Roseville. But SACOG is basically, let's build more bike lanes, let's add more empty buses, things of that nature. And it's not helping the problem of traffic on Interstate 80 now, right around Horseshoe Bar, is getting to be ridiculous. So it's just something to look at. But local cities, especially with the ones within Northern California, leading cities, they need to get on the bandwagon and start pushing either SACOG or their local representatives in the state through the league to start resolving some of these problems with workable things. Some of the things they talk about sound really great, but
sound nice, but they're not really practical.
Actually, I have an issue with that. I mean, take a look around. There is a big disconnect between how much places want to grow and realistically can grow or should grow. And it's not all based on, well, if you're going to grow, you better add more freeways. It doesn't work. It's been proven over and over again. Freeways do not ever, they relieve it for a little bit. I grew up in the Denver area. It has tons of freeways. It has a belt loop. It hasn't helped a thing. It grew like crazy, and it's just as congested as it was before. And here we are in Sacramento. Let's take a look around and see all these places that have done this and learn from their issues of it. It helped nothing. Putting a lane in helps nothing. it becomes just as congested because it spurs the development on where the freeway is or where the lane went in. Developers come and develop, and then you're back to square one. You know, the lane they put in on 80 by Douglas, wait a minute, it's all backed up. It was good for about 3 years, that extra lane they put in. It did nothing. So I think the region needs to look at things much more regionally, holistically, you know, and not just say, Placer County wants to grow, they want to grow. I understand that, you know, that the growth mentality is there, but, you know, let's join this century and say, you know, realistically, how much can you grow? How much do you want to grow? How much can you sustain and grow and afford it? And what is the cutoff of you know,
maxed out.
where are you maxed out, and where does your resources start being impacted too much and your lifestyle being impacted too much? You know, to some degree, there is no reason to always have to say yes to all this growth in that short amount of time, especially Placer County.
Well,
It's growing
you know,
like mad.
Well, you know, I don't know that places are saying yes, we want to necessarily grow. Some may, but it happens.
Yes,
it has to happen, right? Because
But
more
again,
people live in
you
California
can be
continuously.
much
They have to
more
live somewhere.
proactive.
Yeah.
And to say, well, how much are we going to let it happen?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, Boulder County, for the 30, 40 years it's been around, has said, we're only going to let you grow so much. You know, development will not be allowed into these areas until a certain period of time in the future. Plain and simple, don't even ask.
Well, that's part of the sphere of influence, right?
And it's the sphere of influence
you know,
issue that is interesting to California as well.
You know, and then you have to look at it also, that you have the state coming down and telling communities they have to grow.
And you do. And so that's what I said, this is a huge,
They have to expect to grow.
issue that has lots of moving parts and pieces that, you know, that I think have been ignored for a very long time. And now people are trying to scramble and try to figure out what to do. And I don't know if the decisions are always going to be all that good, or if they kind of lead you down a different path of other consequences. You know, it's something that's, you know, to me, should have been looked at 30, 40 years ago.
Is Dixon a part of the California, the League of California?
Yes, they are not.
Don't they have an urban boundary line, and that they can't, that they've, I thought they had an urban, or some kind of
Urban growth boundary?
Yeah.
Say that
A lot-
Do they have a growth boundary?
Yes.
A lot of communities will do that. They'll say, you know, we're not going past this road over this next 20 years where it's not part of the general plan. It's not, you know, maybe it's in the sphere of influence, and because it's in the sphere of influence, we've said we're not, in the next 20 years, we're not going any further. And I know that even the city I live in has done that.
They have a,
So they can't make that road.
They still have to meet the arena numbers.
But
They have to somewhere, they have to figure out how to do it within their bounds that they've set, yeah.
there's a different, Dixon, as you go down Interstate 80, there's an area there, that it's zoned agricultural preserve, which means that the rights to develop have been bought. The landowners have paid money, have been given money to develop, so that they can't develop, it has to remain agriculture. And that's the only way. Roseville had these urban reserve areas set aside when I worked there, and where the Sutter Hospital is right now, that wasn't supposed to be developed until, for 20 years, but because of economic back and forth. So the reserves, there are no more in Roseville, they used to be, and they didn't work. The one that does work though is where they buy the rights of development. And there's another one somewhere up here. Placer County's doing that with a lot of property.
they are purchasing
And that,
some.
but the thing, final word is that in order to provide for a better transportation system, looking at all the proposals I've ever seen, you've got to look at employment centers and base housing, allow housing. If you have employment centers developing, then let housing be there because the people can go to work there. Otherwise, you've got housing all over the place and people are driving, from Yuba City and everything like that.
It's interesting though, because, you know, talking with my son and daughter-in-law, they have jobs in the Bay Area, but they live in Folsom because they don't have to actually work on site. And there's a lot of kids that they're not having to actually go to a brick and mortar, place to actually work. But my question was, when I went to the Planning Commissioners Academy last February, there was a lot of discussion about, concerns that right now we just have to zone for, the affordable housing, but we don't necessarily produce, because again, cities don't produce, it's the developers that produce it. But the concern is that the state will, begin to mandate because no one's producing. That's kind of been part of the problem of, where we're at.
Yeah, well, like you said, you just have to show somehow that you've made progress or why you couldn't make progress, right? And I think that's kind of the cycle that cities have been in for a while. I don't know this, they tried with the transportation stuff, they're trying to figure out ways to get us to do more. But what that ultimate solution, if it's some kind of, I don't know how they would mandate. I mean, kind of in the way they've already mandated it, it's just, you can't produce it, right?
I mean, I think what you heard, and I've heard the same rumor, is like the state's going to come saying, we build the housing city. And that really is the next step, that these cities get into the housing business.
Yeah, and I brought that up, and there are examples throughout the state where cities have taken it upon themselves to build some certain housing or to take over. I've seen that particularly with the downturn in the economy back in 2008-10, where they took over a bunch of housing and just to make sure the lawns were mowed and kept up to keep property values from dropping further. So it's a possibility, and I brought it up myself. I said, is this something, should cities and counties get into the housing building business? And that I don't know, maybe that is something, I don't know.
But didn't we at one time the redevelopment funds and that's taken by the state of California?
Yeah.
So again, the city was doing responsible work with that money, and then the state turned right back around and said, give us the money.
Yeah, they've,
I saw the redevelopment agency again in it. So.
Those development agencies.
Yeah, the redevelopment agency.
And the money was local to what the local communities wanted to see.
Yeah, some were criminal.
But that was
Rockland's Commons.
as a percent, there's always there's that 10%, right? The saying goes, right? And there is. And so with redevelopment agencies, there were that 10%. But that was California's #1 economic development tool that we had.
Okay.
And it was working. And despite that 10%. And so, we've been working to try to get something like that back, and we're still not there. We have enhanced infrastructure financing districts, but they can't happen in an area that was part of a redevelopment designated area. So it's a mess.
Rebranding, right?
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much.
Sorry about that.
Thank you all for being part of the conversation.